Hey, today we're going to be in Deuteronomy chapter 22, and I'm going to begin a string of I guess it's kind of a series within a series. We're talking about how to study the Bible, and we're going to talk about context. Um, Context is a very important point in Bible study. I think we've talked about the fact of that we need to study. We've talked about becoming familiar with the text that you study, and we've talked about eisegesis versus exegesis. And today we're going to talk about context, but we're going to talk about cultural context. What I mean is that when we study the Bible, we've got to remember that the lifestyle, the manner of living, the culture, the paradigm that we have now is not equal to the culture or the paradigm of someone, let's say, 4,000 years ago. Okay, they lived in a different, probably a different area of the world than I know I live in, and probably most people that are watching this video live in a different area than the ancient biblical livers, authors, and people of that nature. So we've got to remember this. If we try to interpret scriptures according to the context in the day and age that we live now in the 21st century, we will misinterpret many verses because we're not reading them in light of the culture back then. And here's one case in point. It's in Deuteronomy 22, verse 5. I heard this verse a lot growing up. You hear this verse a lot if you grew up in like a Pentecostal or apostolic, sometimes charismatic denomination or upbringing. And the verse says here, reading out of the Holman Christian Standard Bible, it says, "A woman is not to wear male clothing, and a man is not to put on a woman's garment. For everyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord your God." So we read that verse, and I think the King James Version says, "A woman should not wear that which pertaineth to a man, neither shall a man wear that which pertaineth to a woman," and something on that lines. But if we read this verse in light of 20th century or 21st century context, we might come to the conclusion, like some denominations have, that a woman shouldn't wear pants and a man shouldn't wear a dress or a skirt, let's say. Now, what we've done is we've interpreted the verse in light of current culture, current context in our culture, instead of doing our best to transport ourselves back to ancient culture. Now, why do I say this? Well, it should be fairly well known, and I think it is, I'll explain why, that both men and women in Hebrew Israelite culture wore basically the same type of garment, a robe. Some people may call it a tunic, but probably more in line with what we would call a robe, like what you see a lot of people wear over in the Middle East today. This is apparent that Christians know this because when they do their Bible plays, especially like at Christmas time, they do these Bible plays, and in the play, to make it more authentic, they will have the men and the women dressed in robes. I remember there was a movie that came out called The Passion of the Christ, and one of the ways that the producer and director and people that were behind the making of that movie made it authentic was that they had everybody speaking in Aramaic, which was cool. But they also had everybody wearing robes, both male and female. So people understand this, but not only is it understood by people, but it's biblical. I'm not going to go over this in a whole lot of detail, but in Genesis 3, verse 21, the Bible tells us the kind of clothing that Yahweh appointed or made for Adam and Eve. And like in the King James Version, it says coats. Some of your other newer translations may say clothing. But it's the Hebrew word kataneth, and it basically means a robe or a tunic. And so there's one word, one Hebrew word that is used for the garment of both the man and the woman. Remember, the man and the woman, they were naked and ashamed after they committed sin in the garden in Genesis 3, and they tried to cover their midsection with aprons of fig leaves, but that wasn't sufficient, so Yahweh gave them coats of skin made out of animal skin. So coats is kataneth, it means a robe. So here we have Adam and Eve both wearing a robe, a kataneth, one word for both of their clothing. So in the culture that, turning back to Deuteronomy 22 and 5, when Moses, or Yahweh through Moses, first gave this commandment, you have to remember that Moses was talking to the men and women, the Hebrew men and women, the Israelite men and women of that time, and they all wore robes, both the male and the female. So that lets us know that Deuteronomy 22 and 5 is not talking about swapping out pants for a skirt. That it's not saying that a woman can't wear pants and a man can't wear a skirt, because both of them were wearing robes. Now, I don't have enough time in the video to go into what the verse is talking about. You can do that in your study time. My point is, how to study the Bible includes looking at the cultural context of the passages that we study. I'll be back next time to talk more about context in another light. Have a great day.